No, the Wembley Arch was lit red last year after the semi-final, but it wasn't yesterday. And United players would have been red in the face at winning that. You only had to look at the reaction from the majority of the players in the centre circle after Rasmus Højlund scored the winning penalty. They were very restrained celebration. They were respectful towards Coventry. Coventry's players, Harry Maguire went over and shook their hands. Anthony ear cupping towards the Coventry players. He should be sent to Coventry. He's not remotely a Manchester United player in any way, shape, or form. I know he had a good game a few weeks ago, and then he was talking last week about how he's possibly hit a turning point. Well, we said on Friday, didn't we? I think, or last week, that was a nonsense, and his reaction yesterday was a nonsense. It just to have. I mean, I overestimated them. I even tweeted done and dusted after the third goal went in, and I even suggested at half time that the game was effectively was done because Coventry just didn't lay a glove on United in the first half. They only had one attempt at goal, which is poor going for any opponent against United these days. But this United side is so fragile mentally. It's not robust in a physical or mental sense. The manager is past the point of no return. The manager whose game management so often last season was so impressive, that has deserted him this season. And yesterday was one of the worst examples of that. Just taking off your two best players this season. And I get it that they're teenagers and he's conscious of protecting them, not overplaying them. But that's on him as well, because if he'd signed fitter players, more robust players, better players, then he wouldn't be overplaying them as much as he has been. He wouldn't have to be starting Alejandro Garnacho 31 times on the spin. He wouldn't have to be overexposing Kobbie Mainoo, who only turned 19 last week, as much as he has been, had he not signed Mason Mount for £60 million when his contract's up this year. I mean, what waste of money that is. He was injured again. €10 million fee for Sofian Amrabat. What a waste of money that was. He wasn't in the squad yesterday. He started once in the last 4 months. And however way you look at it, and I've got one home and away going United fan who is still not of the persuasion that Ten Hag should go. He was still defending him to me last night, but with the greatest of respect to my friend, who's really nice chap, but it reminded me of, I guess it was kind of like tantamount to Jacob Rees-Mogg, or one of those lunatics from the Conservative Party defending Boris Johnson these last days, like Jacob Rees-Mogg or Nadine Dorries. And I'm sure my friend won't thank me for the comparison, but it felt like that. There is not a credible case or a cogent case to keep Ten Hag beyond this season. And when we thought Coventry had won it, I wouldn't say it was a sense of relief, but it was almost as if everyone, including the manager, had been put out of their misery, because I think we all know what's coming, and it might have come today had VAR not intervened with that extremely marginal offside. I mean, I saw Mark Robbins' quote about the player, if he'd cut his toenails, they wouldn't be talking about penalties. And that line, how they concluded it, they must have in some way. We've seen it before, very marginal offsides like that. But I think it's good that technology that was used at the World Cup is coming in next season, because I think that is clearer, even though it's a kind of like a virtual reality screenshot that's presented to viewers. I think it is a lot more accurate and a lot more definitive, and I think that's probably what contributed to the chaos that ensued over Luis Diaz's disallowed goal at Tottenham earlier this season. But we have to accept that it was the right decision, and I don't think many people like VAR, but that's what it exists for. And I think there would have been a lot of people around the country who were crestfallen on Coventry's behalf. There are a lot of Manchester United fans who just left the stadium, who headed for the exits when that goal went in. And some managed to get back to their seats because a friend of mine, he said that he just heard the words, it's been VAR'd. And he went back to his seat, but he told me afterwards he felt sad that United had won. He said he couldn't celebrate. I think there were 8 of them who got the train down. I think he said that they were drowning their sorrows on the way back, which is a very strange way to behave, in essence, after a victorious FA Cup semi-final. But that's just how hollow it was for United. They've never won an FA Cup semi-final, and the supporters have had mixed feelings at best. I don't think they were in a state of euphoria yesterday, and you only had to look at how quickly United's end emptied after the game finished, in contrast to Coventry's end, where Coventry fans were still there in their droves, expressing their appreciation to the players and the manager and the staff, and rightly so. But United fans, it was almost as if they just wanted to get out of there as soon as possible and not allow the memory of the day to linger, which is strange for a team that has just reached an FA Cup final, but that it felt in keeping with the day.
It's the same with the majority of the players as well, of course. I mean, you mentioned Anthony Cup in his ears. That was just ridiculous, wasn't it? After scraping past Coventry in that manner, I just have some shame. Hoyland naturally, I think, celebrated after scoring the penalty, but he turned around and he wasn't exactly mobbed by his teammates. I think it was just Anthony who went up to him and celebrated, and the rest of the team kind of just sheepishly shook hands with the Coventry players. Harry Maguire noticeably did that, so fair play. That shows the gulf in class between Harry Maguire and Anthony, I think. His press conference was interesting, Samuel. You were in the mix zone, of course, but me and Ty were in the press conference room. I think Ten Hag is sounding like a manager on the brink now. We've highlighted a few times now on this podcast that he's really changed his tone this season. He said the win wasn't an embarrassment and that it was a huge achievement, and he referenced reaching 2 FA Cup finals in 2 years. Kind of hit back and said it was crazy to suggest the performance would damage his position. When you're sounding like that and those quotes are coming out, it really doesn't further your cause, does it? It doesn't help your position as Manchester United manager.
Not remotely. And he doesn't sound like a Manchester United manager anymore. Reading the transcript, watching that press conference, reading Ty's write-up from it as well. It's just, he's delusional. He's in denial. And it is an achievement to reach 2 FA Cup finals in successive years. I completely agree with that. Using the word huge, I think, was kind of inappropriate given the manner in which United did it yesterday. And there was some humility about him. I mean, he said that he had mixed feelings, and he struck the right tone initially. But then the more questions that were asked, the more peculiar his answers were. And I've said for a while, I wrote in December, that he's starting to sound like Van Gaal. And it's almost as if he's gone beyond that point, in fact, of Van Gaal. And it's not just a Dutch thing. Of course, if a manager is under pressure, press conferences where I mean, the one at Wembley, it's like a lecture theatre. There are lots of people in there. There are cameras, there are lights. It's not a place many managers would want to be unless they're there in victory. And Ten Hag was there in victory yesterday. But I decided before the penalty shootout that the hook of my piece had to be that he has to go. And you don't take that decision lightly, but the point still stood after that VAR intervention. And speaking to supporters who were there yesterday, observing how supporters reacted, as you said as well, talking to or overhearing fans on the train who were discussing potential replacements. And of course, you spoke to some on Wembley way before the game yesterday. Everyone knows what's going to happen. There are new power brokers. The chief executive jumped before he was pushed. The football director has fallen on his sword. Who's next in line to go? It's the manager, and he has to go. As I said, I did that piece 2 weeks ago, which was probably more balanced, just for the sake of balance. I think I did as many in each section: the case for, the case against. But so much has changed even since then, and nobody, I don't think, in any right mind will be making a case for him to stay now. I mean, what he was talking about, the penalty decisions yesterday, and that this is a club who were saying early on in Ten Hag, during Ten Hag's tenure, that they don't want to highlight decisions by officials. They don't want to use those excuses. And he said earlier in the season, injuries aren't an excuse, but he is using those as excuses almost every week now. I mean, talking about the curse of the amount of penalties United are giving away. If you look at the Wan-Bissaka handball yesterday again in real time, both arms are outstretched. And I know that he doesn't keep them outstretched that whole time, but if you're doing that, you're acting like a handball player or a volleyball player, and the ball hits your arm, you get what you deserve. And it was a penalty. And I know there's a grey area with how handballs are given now. I thought it was a penalty against Jack Grealish on Saturday from Cole Palmer's free kick, because Grealish's arm was similarly outstretched to Wan-Bissaka's, and it's this daft way VAR operates, and that had that not been given against Wan-Bissaka yesterday, I really don't think VAR would have said you've got to give that. And it's the same with the Grealish one on Saturday, or a reverse, if you like, in that if it had been given on the pitch, there's no way they would have overturned it. But that's a problem with the system, and it's a problem with how all the referees interpret it. And it's handball is just something that they cannot settle on a definition of it. But the fact that a Manchester United manager would start carping on about refereeing decisions after they have just scraped past a second-tier club on a penalty shootout in an FA Cup semi-final, having been 3-0 up in the 71st minute, nobody has any time for it. And you'd have to be a Nottingham Forest fan to have time for that kind of jib. I mean, the way Ten Hag's looking at what he said, you wonder if he's moonlighting as the administrator of the Nottingham Forest Twitter account after that extraordinary tweet they put out yesterday. And in fairness to Forest, looking at those decisions, each of them could easily have been a penalty. But this victim complex they have, I've no time for it. And I think it's getting to the point where a lot of people would just like to see the back of them. They've gone way through the looking glass with the amount of times they've moaned about officials and moaned about decisions and bringing Mark Clattenburg on board. But I digress. The fact that Ten Hag was bringing up this curse, that was the word he used, about decisions going against United, was utterly risible. And he would not have been talking like that last season if a decision went against United. He just got on with it. But this season, he's looking for any old excuse to try and portray him in a more flattering light. And all he's achieving in doing that is portraying himself in an even more unflattering light, because nobody believes him.
Just desperation, isn't it? I mean, he referenced the penalties at Chelsea. Obviously, 2 penalties with Antony in the first half, and then Diego Dallo, which were both penalties in my opinion. And then the one against Liverpool as well, when Aaron Wan-Bissaka obviously made that challenge. He seems to believe this season that even the most slightest contentious decision has to be a United penalty, which is just bizarre the way he approaches that. And it is just desperation, as I said. We talked about his in-game management there before. Obviously taking off Kobbie Mainoo and Alejandro Garnacho, replacing them with Antony and Christian Eriksen. I think you turned to me when those changes were made, probably within 6 minutes within each other, I think. It was, I think Garnacho came around 65 minutes, and Kobbie Mainoo was after Coventry had scored their first goal through Ellis Sims. And you said those changes have made United weaker. Look worse now. Obviously, Coventry subsequently scored 2 goals and probably should have won the game in the end.
Yeah, and my friend, who is one of the few, probably the only one left who thinks Ten Hag should stay, was saying, well, what do you expect him to do? He's got to protect these young players. And my counterpoint to that was, if they bought better, if they had a better medical department, if they weren't training them as intensely as they were and risking more injury after a loaded season last season, then he wouldn't be overexposing them as much. And the way those substitutes played out was just so hackneyed. It's, Anthony's going to be the first to come on because Anthony is his favourite. Eriksen's going to be the next to come on because although he's barely had a kick this year, he's the most experienced player. And after that, he's essentially out of options, even though he would have had 7 substitutes left, because all those substitutes left on the bench, he simply would rather not play them. Ahmad only comes on when they're either drawing or losing, and that happened again yesterday. It's tantamount to just throwing a dice because that's all he can do. After him, it's Amari Forson. It has to be Amari Forson because it's going to be a 2-hour game. And he's the only player on the bench, the outfield player, who has played for the first team. The 4 kids there, the 4 schoolboys yesterday, were there on work experience. That is not a slight on them whatsoever. They were there to make up the numbers because the squad is so depleted, so injury ravaged, and the medical department really just a joke. The number of injuries they're picking up. Mason Mount hasn't started a game since 1st of November, and he's got injured again. Sofian Amrabat has not started a Premier League game since December the 17th. He's injured. Willie Camboala, in fairness, has for the first time this season, he has just succumbed to injury, which is a real shame for him because he had some momentum and he would absolutely certainly have started yesterday if he was fit. He's had bad injuries during his time at United, but he's stayed fit pretty much the entirety of the season. And he's got injured at just about the worst time. He could have played at Wembley yesterday, and he may never play for Wembley now for Manchester United. But it's just really bad planning. And to the point that you look at Højlund, who his performance yesterday was absolutely abysmal. He was a boy among men again. I've said that a few times. And I said that when he came up against Van Dijk. And you think, okay, it's Van Dijk. But when he looks like a boy among men against Coventry, it's time to start feeling rather worried about that. His regression since he came back from injury has been stark. He's actually been performing worse than his league form in the first half of the season because he was getting chances. He salvaged yesterday with a pretty clinical penalty in the shootout. But again, it's bad planning because they signed an unproven striker for £72 million in the summer. They thought Anthony Marshall would be a suitable backup, as if he hadn't scored 16 goals in the last 3 years and been injured God knows how many times or played 28 out of a possible 62 games last season. It all goes back, that it all boils down to bad planning by the football administrators or administrator, and obviously Murta isn't there anymore, and he has to take culpability for that, and of course Ten Hag, because this is his squad. There's no two ways about it. Højlund, his signing, he's having to just overplay him because he's not got anyone to take to ease the burden on him. They look at Anthony Marshall. They'd have looked at Anthony Marshall 2 years ago and thought, well, we've got to make the most of him because we're not going to be able to sell him. A sporting director, a football director worth their salt would have moved heaven and earth to get him out of the club and got an alternative striker in who would have been adequate. And I don't mean Wout Weghorst either. So there were just so many. We were discussing yesterday because it went from 3-0 to 3-3, and we were racking our brains. When did United last throw away a 3-goal lead? And extraordinarily, it happened in Sir Alex Ferguson's last game charge at West Brom. And that's almost seen as an achievement because so many records have tumbled at United post-Ferguson that it feels like it's happened more recently, that they've squandered a lead, a 3-goal lead like that. I know it's happened a couple of times with 2-goal leads, and it certainly has this season. But we've become so accustomed to United to being in a position of control, of being ahead in the game, and then throwing it away this season. It's just happened so often that we just assumed it must have happened this season, but it hadn't until yesterday. And you just cannot trust this team anymore. And you've not been able to trust this team for a long time. They are fragile. And I thought, I don't know if I said it at 3-1 or 3-2, but I said United have got some really weak players out there at the moment. And I'm thinking of Anthony. I'm thinking of Højlund as well, just because of the way his afternoon was going. Eriksson is not the most robust of midfielders. McTominay is a robust midfielder, but he was starting to wane and he was clutching his groin when he came off and he limped through the mix zone after the game. How Casemiro completed that game out of necessity. And you looked at the bench and you've got physically underdeveloped, but some players, some of the younger lads almost looking undernourished because they've got the frame for academy football, not first team football. But it all goes back to bad planning in the summer, to thinking that it was a good idea to sign an unproven striker, that it was a good idea to spend £60 million on a player who had injury problems last season when he was going to be out of contract this year. Johnny Evans has done well this season, but he had injury issues last season. He's had injury issues this season. Sofian Amrabat, I mean, even if he was available yesterday, he wasn't going to get a look in. He probably wouldn't even have come off the bench. The vast majority of this is on the manager. He's had a hell of a lot of control. He's had a lot of sway in the transfer market. There's no hiding place. The dossier for why he should go now or at the end of the season is biblical.
You might be able to hear that tree getting cut down outside my flat, Samuel, so we'll leave it there for part 1 and we'll be back on for part 2 and I'll shut my window. Welcome back to part 2 of the Manchester is Red podcast. Now, Samuel, we've got into Ten Hag and his future and the errors he's made. Surely the players have to take some responsibility in this. 3-0 up against the Championship side who are 8th in the table. They lost 3-0 against Birmingham City last weekend. And with 20 minutes to go, you've got to see the game out, don't you? There might be some key players missing through injury, but there was enough senior players on that pitch to be able to manage that game and to claim the victory. It was embarrassing to see them capitulate in the manner they did.
It was. There are no two ways about it. And as I said earlier, I overestimated them. I said the game was done and dusted, but it's a mentally fragile team, and big credit to Maguire, because given his starting point this season, to be enjoying the season that he's having is a testament to his professionalism and his resilience. He was one of United's best players, arguably their best player yesterday. I'm not too sure who got the Man of the Match award, but he soldiered on again through 120 minutes. He indicates to the bench that he had a problem in extra time, but he continued, and you knew if it came to him needing to take a penalty, he'd have been a good bet to score, given how emphatic that penalty he took in the Euros final was a few years ago. Fernandes he is the absolute. He's a beast in terms of his mental strength, his fortitude. I spoke to him after the game. As I said, he had strapping on his wrist because he'd fallen on it. He gave me a very delicate handshake, but you just know that come Wednesday night, he's starting against Sheffield United and he'll be playing 90 minutes against Sheffield United, I would imagine, because that's the way he's built. But there are other players in that team who are just the opposite. I mean, as I said, Wan-Bissaka doesn't face the ball when O'Hare hits that shot, and it's unfortunate that it loops in, but he doesn't face it. He's absolutely all over the place for the equalising, for the penalty, and even the disallowed goal. Just if you look at his positioning, I don't know what he's doing. He's marking a ghost in the 6-yard box. He is caught between two stools. He panics.
Do you think playing at left back's not made it easy for him? I know he's been culpable in a few games recently, and he's played out of position because he's had to.
Yeah,
I think that's an element of it, of course.
It's difficult. Yeah, of course, that's going to contribute, and he's not playing in his natural position. That absolutely should be raised. But he has played there a few times now, and he's playing against Coventry, and he was a 45 to 50 million pound signing nearly 5 years ago. He's been at Manchester United for 5 years. You've seen other Manchester United players through the years fill in here and there and do a competent job over a long period of time because they've got the right mentality and they've got the right approach. And when the pressure is on, they can cope with it. But Wan-Bissaka can't. No two ways about it.
Harry Maguire, Bruno Fernandes, and Diego Dalot, I would say, were the 3 best players in that performance. Yes. If you could pick 3 out, and it was a real captain's performance from Fernandes. He just didn't stop running as usual, and kind of dragged United over the line in the end. I mean, Maguire, again, we'll just have to praise him, Samuel. We've been kind of full of praise in the last few weeks, last few months for Harry Maguire. We kind of got into him, which can't remember which game it was after quite recently, me and you, but we discussed his season and how it's developed. But he does feel like he's kind of turned around his United career this season. He was out in the cold last year, stripped of the captaincy, to have the character and the resilience. And you're really seeing that on the pitch quite literally in the last 2 weeks when he's been playing for injuries. Did it again at Wembley, and he did it at Bournemouth last weekend when he was clutching his left thigh. I think he said after the game that he hadn't even trained this week. So to go and play 120 minutes and to deliver that performance, that was fantastic.
It was, and he deserves immense credit for it. I don't know if he will get it from the online crowd. As I've said before, we've always been constructively critical of him. He had a good first season, he had a decent second season, he had a bad third season, and the fourth season was even worse. And he was on the brink of being sold in the summer, but this season has probably been his second best for United, I would say, the way it's shaping up. And had they won easily yesterday, or had they seen the game out 3-0, 3-1, the story would have been about the two players who Ten Hag felt he didn't need in the summer being there in his hour of need and getting him to an FA Cup final, because McTominay and Maguire were available for transfer in the summer. And I don't blame United for listening to offers for them or entertaining the prospect of selling them, given the state of play at the time. But it doesn't reflect well on a manager when they become as integral as they have done this season. McTominay's goal getting has been excellent. He's had his best season goals wise.
I think you can think of
and
two
also
games straight
all
away,
those.
can't you? That Brentford game in October, obviously McTominay, Maguire contributed with the header, and then I know it didn't matter in the end, but Maguire got the match winner in the Champions League as well, didn't he? The 1-0 against Copenhagen.
Yeah,
Big
and with
moments.
McTominay's, well, the Copenhagen one wasn't a big moment in
Well,
the
I
end,
know it was
given.
redundant in the end, but
Yeah, but Maguire's, I know he's had a couple, 2 or 3 injury issues this season, which have probably certainly prevented him from playing more games. But going back to McTominay, you look at the 10 goals he scored, all of them have been important. There's not been one that's been a tap in with United 3-0 up. It's either been, I think he's secured 9 points in the Premier League with his goals. He scored in the quarter-final, he scored in the semi-final, he scored in some testing away games as well. Got the opener at Sheffield United when they won 2-1, put them 3-1 up at Galatasaray. I'm struggling to think of the others. It obviously put them 3-1 up at Wolves as well, and there was a hell of a lot more to come in that game after he restored their 2-goal lead. Maguire and McTominay have had good seasons, and with so much uncertainty over other players' futures at the club, you feel as though those two probably will stay at the club next season. They've both got similar contract expiry dates, I think. Final contract expiry dates, I should say, if you factor in the +1. I think that takes both of them to 2026. And look, there is resale value, and you can never say never if a silly offer comes in from a club and it suits all parties. But Maguire in particular, I think has done a really commendable job, because I mean both of them have been whipping boys for the caustic brigade online, the abusive brigade online. As I said again, look, we've praised and criticised every player in that United squad, but we're balanced with it and we're objective, and it's constructive criticism, and it's fair as well. I would always argue. I don't think I've ever been unfair in an assessment of a player, whether it's positive or negative.
it's probably worth discussing Anthony's full-time reaction in a bit more depth than Samuel. I suppose things like that can seem a bit trivial, but his time in Manchester has been very, very disappointing. To act like that, I mean, it's rare to see your own fans give a player such stick, but I mean, even United fans are criticising them for that on social media. And as I said in the first part, it just goes to show the kind of the gulf in class between Maguire and Anthony and the difference in their reactions, doesn't it?
Well, Anthony is just he's not a Manchester United player in the truest sense in any way, shape, or form. And I get that sometimes you want some character and a spiky streak in a player, and that can be beneficial. And there were times last season where that streak from Anthony, you did see the benefit of it, and there was that Latino rebranding of the team, if you like, in Ten Hag's first season with Martinez at centre half, Dalot firmly established at right back, Rafa Varane of course, is a fluent Spanish speaker. Casemiro ahead of them. Anthony on the right wing. Fernandes, of course, is another Portuguese speaker. Sometimes Fred would start. Fred started in both cup finals last season, and it helped United last season. United were enhanced by the character of those players coming in. Martinez in particular, Casemiro as well, of course. Anthony less so, but you saw there were elements that were likeable about Anthony. But this season, I mean, I think I remember, was it in the derby when they lost 3-0 at home, and there was that clip of him shaking his head on the bench. Then he came on, and his conduct was embarrassing, just trying to kick Jeremy Doku at every opportunity he got, just in a very truculent mood, just not endearing himself whatsoever. And he didn't endear himself yesterday. As I said, I flagged it before the game, didn't I? That his team had misspelt Coventry's name in the preview post on his Instagram page, and the lack of respect extended to his reaction at the final whistle after the winning spot kick. But he's someone who should be sent to Coventry. Anthony, he's not a Manchester United player in the truest sense of the form, as I've said already.
Coventry fans might take offence by that, Samuel. You might get a few tweets off a few.
I think you've. I think you probably missed. Are you not familiar with the phrase "sent to Coventry"? I take it.
Is that a Peep Show reference or something like that?
That's yes. It doesn't literally mean send him to the Rico Arena or whatever it's called these days, or to Coventry City Football Club. It's just, you can Google it afterwards. But no, it wasn't. I wouldn't want to wish Anthony upon Coventry City Football Club.
Well, if Anthony didn't endear himself to fans, Samuel, I mean, Andrew Nana did. He was important in the penalty shootout. I think he made a few important saves. It was that a volley at the end, wasn't it, when Coventry, I can't remember which player it was, but it was a well-hit volley. It was a save Nana should have made, but it was an important save nonetheless. And obviously he was big in the penalty shootout. He did get a yellow card in the penalty shootout, and it was that exact moment where we all looked at each other and thought, well, he's done his research, because earlier in the week, Emi Martinez, the Aston Villa goalkeeper, had got yellow carded during the game in their Europa League. I think it was the quarterfinals
conference league.
Yeah,
against Lille. Yeah.
And obviously he got another yellow card in the penalty shootout, but he wasn't sent off. And it later transpired there's a rule that it doesn't carry on if the penalty shootout. So Anana had done his research, Samuel, and I love that from a goalkeeper. A bit shithousery, if I can say that word, in a penalty shootout. It's always fantastic to see.
It worked because Ben Sheaf, during that stoppage where Anana was booked, Ben Sheaf skied his penalty, and Anana couldn't have dived further away from it either. He went low down to his left. The ball was going towards the top the top left hand corner as we're looking at it. So Onana's pretty much going in a completely opposite direction. But it clearly worked, and he's not the first goalkeeper to try the gamesmanship. I asked him about it in the mix zone afterwards, and he said the words he used were provocation and tricks, which I think were quite accurate. And when he was doing an on-pitch interview at full time, it appeared on the big screen, and Coventry fans started booing him, which was additional confirmation that his tricks and provocation had worked. And I think that gamesmanship is permissible. Fabian Barthez did it a couple of times when he was at United against, I think it was Muzzy Izzet in 2001 and Steve Malbranc in 2002, where he's delaying a penalty kick, he's kicking his studs against the post, and in both cases he saved the penalties. So it's been going on for 20 odd years, and you go back to Bruce Grobbelaar, 84, doing the jelly legs as well, which was quite original, given that when you I think even sometimes when you watch penalties, even if you don't have anything riding on it or nothing at stake, you just naturally feel nervous because they are so tense. And then you imagine what the players must be feeling like, where they have to make that bloody walk from the halfway line to the 12-yard spot, place the ball down, and you've got tens of thousands of fans praying that you'll score, tens of thousands of fans giving you grief, hoping you don't score. The psychology that comes with penalties is probably, it must be indescribable. Obviously, I can't relate, but just imagining it, you start to feel stressed yourself, even though it's not going to be you taking it. And if you're a goalkeeper, you need to do your absolute utmost to try and make that goal frame shrink. And there's a great line I remember from David Walsh after the Euros final and Gianluigi Donnarumma's heroics for Italy, and he said I think it was Donnarumma, a goalkeeper so large he could block out the sun. And there'll be, I can't remember what film it was, but there's a film, very old film, with Catherine Hepburn where she's playing a tennis player, and there's a scene where she's having self-doubt while playing tennis, and she keeps looking at her racket, and every time the racket is shrinking. And I'd like to watch the scene again, but this must have been 70, 80 years ago. And even then, that was an example of a film really, kind of nailing the doubts that sportsmen or sportswomen can go through in real high pressure situations. And Onana's been around the block. I wasn't entirely sure what his penalty record was yesterday. I know he saved one earlier in the season for United from Jordan Larson, but what it was like at Inter Milan and Ajax, I don't know. We had a better idea in terms of the penalty takers for United. Diogo Dalot has got a very, very good record. He's scored 4 out of 4 from in shootouts for United now. Casemiro looked like he'd been watching Bernardo Silva in the week, and his penalty, it was almost like, put this manager out of his misery. It was a really poor penalty.
When you win
with
the toss
Fernandes
in your first penalty taker, when you win the toss, obviously United won the toss to take first, and then they won the toss to have their penalties at the United end. And then Casemiro steps up and takes that penalty. You think, for God's sake, as a United fan.
And I thought he would score. He took a pretty good one last season, if I remember rightly, against Brighton, and he was the first taker in that shootout against Brighton. So it was logical that you go for him, because there are all these debates as to whether, in terms of holding your best penalty taker back, and of course, there was the hubris of John Terry's slip in Moscow that time, where clearly, because he's John Terry, he thought, I'll go fifth and I'll get the shot at glory. And then you had that glorious scene of that glorious shot of him on his backside, and it dawning on him that he'd cocked it up and he'd squandered that opportunity. And with Fernandes yesterday, he was the fourth taker, so you are taking a bit of a risk there, but it worked out well for United, because you just knew after Onana had made the save from O'Hare, and United then had the opportunity to go ahead for the first time in the shootout. And when you see it's Fernandes stepping up, psychologically, as a Coventry player or a Coventry keeper, you're thinking, oh no, the momentum has swung here. And it happens so often in penalty shootouts that the team that miss first still go on and win the shootout. It obviously happened with United on Sunday, and it happened with Real Madrid last week, because Modric missed before Bernardo Silva or Mateo Kovacic. So it's like there was a book written about the psychology of penalties, I think, quite a few years ago, and I read some extracts of it, and it is quite an interesting subject matter. But we're just to put your own, just to try and imagine what it must be like for the players, and you think back to the jelly legs of Bruce Grobbelaar. There's a reason why he did it, because players stepping up to take a penalty, they must feel like that. They must. Well, Zinedine Zidane that time at Euro 2004 wasn't even a shootout, but he had that penalty to win it against England in France's first group game. He was sick before he took it, and that's what pressure penalties do to you. But unsurprisingly, he had the bottle to stick it away and win that game.
Famous story I was listening to recently, Gary Lineker, I was telling it about Italian 90 penalty shootout, and Bob Robson coming up at a crucial point, and instead of calming the nerves, he just went, lads, there's only 60 million people watching you back home, don't mess up. Something along those lines. What a way to get into the psyche of your players and encourage them to find the back of the net. We'll leave it there for part 2. We'll be back in a moment for part 3. So in 2 days' time, Samuel, United are back in action. They've got Sheffield United at Old Trafford. Sheffield United are bottom of the Premier League. So on paper, it should be a penalty kick. But I think after watching United scrape over the line against 8th place Championship side Coventry, it really probably won't be. And as well, there is more injury concerns. A few players limped through the mix zone. It's the walking wounded at the moment. United are beaten, downtrodden. What are your thoughts ahead of that game?
Well, the league season's been a write-off for 2 or 3 weeks, and they can't just toss it off because, say they somehow, and I'm at the risk of overestimating them again, but I don't think they will lose to Sheffield United. But if they were to somehow lose to Sheffield United, then how can you not? The question has to be asked: How can you not sack the manager after a game like that? I mean, that would be the worst case scenario: losing to one of the worst teams in the Premier League era, the bottom team in the Premier League, and it notching, like, racking up the 13th league defeat of the season, which would be a record in the Premier League era. And look, Sheffield United were battered 4-1 by Burnley at the weekend. They've been a waste of time this season, frankly, which is very different to when they got promoted in 2019. They had a really good first season. They were certainly one of the teams that suffered the most from the pandemic, because Bramall Lane was a real cauldron. They did a very good job of making it a really tough place to go, and Liverpool only won, I think, 1-0 there through quite a fortuitous goal through a Dean Henderson mistake. United got pummeled there. Somehow went from 2-0 down to 3-2 up, but then gave it away in added time, which is kind of reminiscent of this team. But Ten Hag tomorrow, of course, he'll be asked about injuries. I tried to ask him at the weekend, and he said we have some problems, and that indicated that there were some injuries and other injuries that hadn't been established. And he didn't specify them. And then, of course, we did the story on the Saturday, and when I saw that Ethan Wheatley was still with the squad and Louis Jackson had been drafted in, when you see those players in, given that Anthony and McTominay had been declared fit and Maguire was likely to travel, you know immediately that some other flies have dropped. And of course, it's turned out that it was Camboala, Mount, and Amrabat, and that's why you had the 4 teenagers on the bench yesterday who've never played for the club before. And by the way, what a shame that was. If United hadn't collapsed, then they could have hit the 250th mark for academy graduates to debut for the first team. But that number continues to elude Ten Hag. It might have to happen on Wednesday just because of the tight turnaround between games. I'm actually dreading the prospect of someone asking Ten Hag whether it's unfair that United are playing on a Wednesday after an FA Cup semi-final and the scheduling, as if anyone would sympathise with United over that. But it's something you can imagine that he would lap up, because the recovery time is indeed short between games. And yes, the workload on the players, I think, has been far too taxing in the last couple of years. I mean, players in general, of course, through a ridiculously timed World Cup, through the expansion of the Champions League that's come in, the Nations League matches in June 2022 as well. You've got Newcastle and Tottenham embarking on a post-season match against each other in Perth, I think, haven't you, next month or early June. Some of these problems are avoidable, but again, nobody's got any time for that with United. The injury situation, they've hit the 60 mark for injuries or illnesses that have caused a player to miss a game this season, and I'd be surprised if they don't break the 70 barrier before the end of the season. We've still got 5 weeks of the season left. United have got 7 games overall, 6 in the Premier League and the FA Cup final. So there's still time for more flies to drop, because if everyone was to return on schedule, I think they would be able to possibly play their what many would consider their best team against City in the final. And that's why it is premature to look too far ahead to that, because you don't know what team United are going to put out. And although they've been beaten convincingly in the last few derbies, they have they have been resilient in 3 games this season against Liverpool and avoided defeat against them. It was a tight defeat at Arsenal, going 2-1 up. I think they'd gone 2-1 up and then conceding to go 2-1 down in added time. They beat Villa home and away, although certainly the away win was extremely fortuitous, and they were not convincing whatsoever that day. But these 2 games this week, I mean, Rich said to dinner yesterday before the game, he said, no way will they win these next 3 games. And he's already right, really, because that game yesterday, it was won via a shootout. It was drawn in 90 minutes. It was drawn over 120 minutes. So I don't know what the bookmakers whether they would define it as a win or a draw, but I think especially the manner in which it played out, it would be more befitting to regard it as a draw. You've got that quirk on soccer base, haven't you? Which I think if you look at United's wins, draws and losses column, they have the Liverpool 4-3 down as a draw, which is definitely inaccurate. That was very much a win. But yesterday, there were very few people of United persuasion who left Wembley thinking that they'd won that game.
I would love to see the odds around the 69th, 70th minute when United are 3-0 up against a Coventry Championship side. I think maybe 500 to 1 it would have been in play for Coventry to turn that around. I just checked the date there from the Brentford game for 23 days ago when we were down at the G-Tech. And I mean, we looked at that squad when it was announced. It was confirmed, obviously, the official teams came through. And it was only Luke Shaw who was missing. I mean, 23 days later, they had the strongest squad available. Now look at it, they're back to square one. It's depleted again, which is remarkable, really. And as you rightly said, I think it was in the second part, a lot of those players haven't even played in the meantime. They've just been training. So there's something clearly amiss there. We've not even discussed Marcus Rashford, Samuel. His performance was very disappointing. I thought, again, it has been for a few weeks now. We obviously had that kind of upturn when he scored on his return from his boozer in Dublin when he scored against Wolves, but he hasn't kicked on since then. He walked out the mix zone with a slight limp. Is it time to perhaps start Ahmad and give him a chance against Sheffield United on Wednesday night?
It's probably time to start Ahmad. It's also probably time to start the ball rolling on finding a buyer for Rashford in the summer. The relationship between him and the match goers is broken, possibly beyond repair. And I know things can change quickly, and the timing of his goal at Wolves after the Belfast bender was absolutely crucial. I think it was 4 minutes into the game, and it nipped it in the bud any possibility of the away fans turning on him that night. And he was playing right in front of them, and of course after he scored, they were reveling in it and chanting about his jaunt to Belfast the previous week and making light of it. But he got booed yesterday, and it's not the first time this season he's got booed. He's been cheered off in some games. He's crossed the manager a couple of times. He's been disciplined a couple of times. He was dropped from the matchday squad at Newport. I still have a feeling that he was actually dropped against Fulham in London, but he was taken down with the travelling squad just to be made an example of. I know United said he was injured at the time where he had a late fitness test, but given the circumstances and how Ten Hag dealt with him over the Belfast situation, I wouldn't be surprised if it was to come out one day that he was actually dropped for that game. And you're right, I actually thought in the first half yesterday, like pretty much everyone playing for United, he did quite well. I know he missed one particularly good chance with a feeble finish that might not even been going in had the goalkeeper not grazed the ball, and he hit the crossbar. That of course contributed. That led to the corner that United scored from. But United fans just don't seem to have any time for him. That time where he was down with an injury, and I think it clearly was an injury because he had to come off. But there was no sympathy, and he was getting I mean, I missed it, and I think we all did because we were in the West press box, so we're in the Coventry end, and of course that can have a bearing or certainly distort the sound that you might be hearing compared to other people in the stadium. And amid the din after the equaliser and the anticipation of extra time among the Coventry fans, I didn't clock the booing for Rashford, but people said he got booed, and I'm sure it was audible on TV as well. I spoke to my mum and dad who watched the game, and they said they heard it. So when your approval ratings are plummeting to such a low, and let's face it, a lot of Manchester United fans for a number of months have been in favour of selling Rashford in the summer. You can't just have this culture again where a manager comes in and says, I want to get the best out of Marcus Rashford. I think you just have to accept that he blows hot and cold. He's got resale value. He's a 26-year-old. He's tested the manager a couple of times this season. And also just think for all parties concerned, it is in a change of scenery is in his best interests, irrespective of the manager situation as well. And I know a new manager could come in and say, well, no, actually, I absolutely want to keep him. But United have to have a structure now where those decisions, it's not the manager always having the say. So, and then someone puts forward a compelling case and outlines that's why we're getting rid of him and that's why we're doing this. And if you still want to manage us with that knowledge, then fine. If you don't want to manage us because of that, then we'll have to move on and get someone else. They've got to get that level of really decisive decision making, because too often they're leaving it too late in a transfer window, and you can't really do that with someone like Rashford because of his profile and the fee that he could fetch, because there's only a small pool of clubs out there who realistically would be able to afford him and would actually come to the table for a conversation if he was to be made available.
PSG seem like the front runner, don't they? If Rashford was to leave, it seems like that would maybe suit all parties and it would be a sensible move. Before we wrap up, I'll end on a positive note, Samuel, because United's under-18s who have enjoyed a fantastic season, who were crowned league champions last week. They're in action against Manchester City on Tuesday night in the Premier League Cup. So they could potentially do a cup double, which would be fantastic to see. And like I say, they've enjoyed a wonderful campaign. So if you can get along to Leigh Sports Village, I believe tickets are free. Check that out if you're based around the Manchester area, and go along and support those young players because they really deserve it. They've had a really good year. Thanks for your time, Samuel.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
And thanks to listeners as usual. Have a great week and take care.